Welcome to En Breve. I'm Gilberto Pinela, and today we visit the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce offices of Auentico, a podcast hosted by Gabriela, Ramirez-Arellano, and Junior Lara. Luego, we visit with Dr. Ness Sandoval, who's talking to us about the experience of the Latinx demographic growth here in St. Louis. So stay tuned for more En Breve right here on STL TV. Welcome back to En Breve. I'm here with the co-host of Auténtico, right from the offices of the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. And with me is Gabriela Ramirez-Arellano and Junior Lara, who are the new podcasters right here in St. Louis, promoting everything that is Latinx to our community. So, first of all, Gabriela, I want to find out where you're from. Give me a little bit about your heritage.
So I'm originally from Mexico. I moved here from Mexico. We actually went to California, and we ended up in Missouri when the Wentzville Assembly Center opened up. My dad got transferred. So I went to school here. I went to Mizzou. Then I got married, and we moved to Michigan. So I was there for 20 years. And then I came back. We opened a business, and just excited to be here.
And what was that business that you opened up? Because, it's food related, so I need to know this.
Yes, it's Don Emiliano's in O'Fallon, Missouri, sharing our authentic recipes. And I say authentic just because it's a broad range of, what we actually like to do. The tongue tacos are one of my favorite. But we also have a lot of vegan and vegetarian options too, so.
Okay, so I'm going to have to run over there right after we finish taping because I'm getting hungry already. Junior, okay, give me your background, your heritage, just briefly.
Sure. I was born in the Dominican Republic, and then at the age of 10, my family and I moved to New York City, grew up between Washington Heights and the Bronx. And in 2004, we moved to St. Louis.
Okay, and what made you move to St. Louis? I mean, obviously you were a kid, right?
Right.
Okay.
Right. Very young.
So
very young.
Okay, that's
very young.
what made him move to St. Louis. Okay.
Very young.
But anyway, what made you stay?
Yeah. So family. My parents separated, like I said, early 2000s. My mom moved here, and then a year later I followed, and then family just made me stay here.
So dominicano, 100%.
100% dominicano.
Así mismo, y mexicana 100%, desde luego, of course. Okay, so tell me about Auténtico. Give me a little bit about the synopsis of the show, of the podcast that you're doing.
Well, we really wanted to provide a platform to provide access. Access for Latinx professionals and business owners to access whatever they need, whether it's education, resources, support, even just, I've been through this, I know how it feels, which sometimes can make a big difference.
Okay, and Junior, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, and a lot of what we share is our personal experiences, but we're looking to also add different stories from different professionals in the community as well.
Can you give me a little rundown on the topics that you cover with Auténtico?
Yeah, so some of the ones that we've done have been about failing forward, embracing failure, networking. Some of them are more cultural needs that we see that we've struggled with, and so we want to make sure that we bring those to the table, whether it's asking for help or, valuing yourself and your pricing and or your career when you are trying to negotiate a raise or, really topics that are central to what's happening right now.
I know I listened to Falling Forward, and you were telling about a story of how you view things differently now after going through a little bit of pain. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, I mean, just pretty much a different perspective, after you learn, unfortunately, and which is why, one of the reasons we created the podcast is we wanted to be able to help people not make the same mistakes. There's absolutely no reason for someone to, going back to the pain piece, right? To experience the same amount of pain. If we can help someone accelerate their career, accelerate the impact that they can have, then why not do it? And that's really one of the purposes of the podcast.
Okay, so what are the goals that you have for the next 6 months with the podcast and then moving into the future?
Well, we just launched earlier this month, so we're about our 1 month anniversary. But our next step is roundtable discussions, right? So we want to bring in community leaders to come and talk about some of the same things that they've struggled with, that they could share, that people can learn from as we celebrate their successes.
Well, congratulations on that. Now I want to find out a little bit about your opinion about St. Louis and how the community in general has embraced the Latinx community and you guys in particular.
Yeah, I definitely think that I wasn't sure how coming back to St. Louis would be because the first time I was here, it was not a positive experience.
Okay.
But I found a family and I found a supportive, collaborative environment when I got here. I don't know if that has a lot to do with, I'm sure it does, with a lot of the work that the Hispanic Chamber and other Latinos did before I got here to change that. But there's still definitely a lot of opportunity to make a difference and to be a little bit more inclusive.
And Junior, how about you?
I feel like it's been great. So a good friend of mine described St. Louis as a curtain city. And she said, when you first get here, you don't realize how much diversity we have, how many Latinos are in St. Louis, until you pull back the curtain and you realize that's what they are right there, right? I mean, I share a story where, I was here for about 5 years until I first came in or joined a Hispanic Chamber of Commerce business after hour meeting. And that's when I realized, here's the VP of this company, same Latino last name, Ramirez, Martinez. And I'm like, here's exactly where they've been.
They're just not doing the talk, they're doing the walk.
Yes.
They're doing the walk every day, providing for their families and providing for the community as well.
Exactly.
So what do you think are the challenges that we still face as Latinx Hispanics here in St. Louis?
I would say definitely cultural, language, and technology access are still the big three for me in dealing with small businesses every day. Because they have a hard time accessing services if they don't, maybe they understand English, but it's a technical English, right? It's a attorney legal English. Or maybe the cultural pieces about financing and asking for a loan or being banked are hindrances because of their own past experiences. So until we really start to understand why people are not engaging with the banking system, we're not going to be able to change it. And so that's some of the work that we're doing right now, whether it's with the podcast Auentico or at the Chamber or some of the other groups, is how do we bring it to the mainstream and help people understand that this is the way that that we learn and the way that we function.
It's one of those things like we just didn't want to have a podcast that was just a business podcast. How do we make our podcast stand out apart from the fact that we are sharing a lot of personal stories in our own perspective, but also, why not just speak the languages that are natural and just come out to us? Like my professional language is English, but a lot of times for me to be able to emphasize a point, I have to use a Spanish word. Otherwise, I don't feel like I can get my point across,
When you get mad, you go into Spanish. It's like, mira, ven acá. No?
Exactamente.
Exactamente. So has the community embraced the fact that you're doing the Spanglish version of the podcast?
I definitely think so. We've gotten a lot of feedback. We've gotten a lot of engagement. And like I said, even though it's only been about a month, we really feel welcomed and excited about going forward.
Well, I'm really excited, and I really like that podcast about the accents. Can you elaborate a little bit? Because I do have my accent, and I love my accent, my Puerto Rican accent, and it will never leave me. Mm-hmm. So can you elaborate? It's starting with you, Junior.
Sure. So I have an accent. Surprise!
Right? Anyway.
So there was a time that I was very self-conscious about my accent. And I would be in meetings and, kind of looking around. I was the only person that looked like me, but even sound like me as well. So then I was working very hard to just really not let my accent come out. But the more excited I got, the more mad I got, the more that it came out. And then in talking about that episode, we're like, what? We should just embrace our accent. Mm-hmm. And then we even came out with the hashtag, tengo acento y qué.
Tengo acento y qué. Hashtag tengo acento y qué. Gabriela, rapidito.
Well, I think that it's very valuable because a lot of times that's what keeps us out of meetings, out of doors is, I have an accent or I'm going to stand out. And so really, how do we celebrate who we are and continue to stand out in a positive way? and giving people the platform to be like, yeah, hashtag tengo acento y qué. Like, let me hear you say something because I know you don't speak another language.
Awesome. Well, listen, I got to plug you. So you got to give me like all that information where we can listen to and when.
So every Wednesday at 7 o'clock, we have a new episode that comes out, except the roundtable discussions will be Wednesday, the last Wednesday of the month in the evening. But you can listen to us on all your favorite podcast platforms, on Facebook, on all the social media platforms. Our website is autenticopodcast.com. What else?
What else, Junior?
I mean,
Dale.
you pretty much covered it. Like,
We're
you can't miss
everywhere.
us. We can't miss us. We're everywhere.
You're everywhere,
Yes.
and I like your hairstyle, by the way.
Thank you.
Anyway, listen, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to be here with you talking about Auentico. Don't forget to listen to the podcast. This is for the Latinx and not Latinx community that want to find out what's going on with our community here in St. Louis. We're very proud of what you're doing, so thank you so much. Keep breaking doors and forging the path ahead for other people to walk through it. So,
Thank you so
and
much.
with that, we're going to come back with more En Breve after this break.
Well, Thomas, you've got prediabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have prediabetes. Big time.
Welcome back to En Breve. It is an honor, truly, to have the Associate Professor of Sociology from St. Louis University, Dr. Ness Sandoval, with us today. And Dr. Ness Sandoval, thank you for being here on En Breve. And I want to jump right in and find out, what's your heritage? Where are you coming from, your roots?
Well, thank you for inviting me to be here this evening. So I have a complicated biography. So I grew up in Nebraska in a small town called Scotts Bluff. So on my mom's side of her family tree, they migrated from Mexico after the Mexican Revolution.
Okay.
And they made their way through New Mexico, Colorado, and then met my grandfather and then got married and moved to Kansas and finally settled in Nebraska. My family started to settle there around 1920. So it's a very old Mexican community. But on my dad's side, they're from New Mexico. And so the border crossed them after the War of 1848.
Oh,
so they
wow.
were living in New Mexico for a very, very long time. And so I have two very interesting histories in terms of what I consider myself and trying to understand my place here in the United States.
So you are in a very important position here in St. Louis and doing the spatial studies for demographic of immigrants and also American cities. What life experiences got you to this path?
So actually growing up in Scotts Bluff, Nebraska was part of my motivation of trying to understand why places matter. So because my hometown had a very large Mexican population for many, many decades, it was unique because it's in Nebraska, which was a majority white state, but it still had this very large Mexican population because of the agriculture and the sugar beet factory and the meatpacking houses. But I grew up in a segregated neighborhood. And so part of my research is trying to understand my own biography.
Okay.
Because I had access to schools outside of my neighborhood because my parents made a decision that they wanted me to have a private education at a Catholic school. But that was not afforded to everybody in my neighborhood. And so I had friends in my neighborhood that I played with after school. But then I had friends from my private school that didn't live in my neighborhood. And so I think as I started to become an adult and I started to go to the university and learn these different theories of why place matters, I felt myself trying to explain my own biography and trying to understand that even though I did grow up in this neighborhood that was segregated, I still had access to privilege. But that was the decision that my parents made because they understood that education was important.
Yes.
So that's part of my motivation even today is trying to understand my own ability to access privilege, because I understand how important that is in determining quality of life for individuals. And then what about individuals who don't have that access or who don't have that knowledge of understanding the role that education plays or the role that parks play? Part of me is trying to understand what those implications are when we think about spatial inequality, because places are not equal when you get to bigger cities. I grew up in a small town of 15,000 people. So the impact was pretty small, but there was still an impact. But when you grow up in a city like St. Louis, that's 2.8 million, where you live in a neighborhood that doesn't have the privilege.
Yes.
They have life-changing consequences for children and other individuals in those neighborhoods.
And your experience, you lived in both worlds.
Yes,
So that really motivated you, that allowed you to be able to see the privileged side with your friends that were going to Catholic school.
absolutely.
And then the other side of it.
And what's interesting about this, so my town was 15,000. As I moved to Lincoln, Nebraska, it was 200,000. I moved to Washington, D.C. I moved to the San Francisco Bay Area. I moved to Chicago. I moved to St. Louis. It was basically the same pattern that I was experiencing in all these metropolitan regions. And so that, when you see a pattern emerge over and over and over again, you want to understand why this pattern exists, but then what are the factors that created the pattern in the first place? And what are the implications for people who live in places that have concentrated disadvantage? And then what can we do to try to think of these places in terms of spatial justice, to try to bring resources to these neighborhoods to improve the human condition for these individuals?
Okay, and that's how you got into spatial inequality in American cities, and the research that you're doing is so important right now,
Yes.
especially as we live through this time period that there's a lot of inequality in our society. How are you able to use that research and promote or offer that research?
So spatial inequality is not necessarily new.
Okay.
People have been talking about spatial inequality for a very long time. What's new, and why I think my research and research that's in my field that focus on spatial inequality, is that we have new technology, new methodologies that accurately describe spatial inequality in terms of what's happening in neighborhoods. So it's not only making maps, but it's taking those maps and saying, this pattern in this map is statistically significant.
Okay.
That's what's different. And so we have more scientific evidence that says, well, this pattern existed in 1930, but it was more subjective. Now we're in 2019, and it's not really about whether you and I believe that map. We're able to produce a set of statistics and objectively say there is spatial inequality in these neighborhoods.
So there's better information out there.
Yeah.
It's more.
It's more scientifically grounded in relationships that exist that are being reproduced over and over again. And so what we can do now is go back in time and analyze data from the 1930s and 40s that were analyzed subjectively.
Oh, wow.
But we can apply these statistics and saying, okay, that was a subjective interpretation of what was happening. This is objectively what was happening in 1930.
Wow.
And that's changing how we interpret the city historically, but it changes how we think about policy if these inequalities were in fact that strong in the 1930s, and they really have not changed in 2019 in many parts of the city.
So is that how you came up with the St. Louis multiracial integration map? Is that how you developed?
So part of me, so I've always been fascinated. So when we think about spatial inequality, we think about segregation. We think about white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, and we have this history of the maps that were created. But what's happening in the United States demographically is that we're becoming a racially diverse country.
Yes.
And that diversity is at the national level, but we're seeing it in places like New York, Chicago, Houston, Los Angeles. Fundamental demographic changes are happening that are revolutionary in many respects. And so we're starting to see some of that happen in St. Louis. And so part of making these maps is trying to get a sense, yes, we do have a problem of racial segregation, but we're also starting to see the future of American cities through these racially integrated neighborhoods. And St. Louis has these neighborhoods, Chicago has these neighborhoods, and they're important in terms of the fabric of American cities, in terms of how are these neighborhoods different in terms of economic opportunity, educational opportunity, cultural identity. So they're fundamentally shaping how we think about cities. We still have a problem of the color line.
Yes.
But I argue that the color line is a multi-color color line. And this has to do with immigrants coming in, different groups moving from cities into different parts of the country. And so it's going to be exciting to live in American cities.
So how is the Latinx community, the Hispanic or Latino community doing in 2019 here in St. Louis?
I think compared to other large metropolitan regions, the Latino population is doing pretty good. Part of it has to do with the fact that about 1/3 of Latinos were born and raised here in St. Louis metropolitan region, but everybody else has migrated from other parts of the country. So I'm a migration. I came from Chicago.
Me too.
Here, many people are coming from New York here who are
Yes.
Latino, and so and this has to do with the growth of the Latinos nationally. It's the fastest growing population nationally, and so they are moving from Houston, they are moving from Los Angeles, and they're trying to find the American dream. And some of them are coming to St. Louis to find this dream. And they're bringing human capital with them. They're bringing economic capital with them to start businesses. And so I think St. Louis is in a prime position to attract these Latino
More
residents.
Latinx, more Hispanic or Latino
Yeah.
people coming in. Well, I wish that we had more time to talk and elaborate more about the demographics of Hispanics and how they're moving into St. Louis and,
Sure.
and the state of Missouri as well. But unfortunately, we ran out of time. So what I'd like to do is find out where can we get in contact with you? How can we get in contact with you if we want to find out more information
Absolutely. So the easiest way is to go to Google and search for Ness Sandoval on Twitter. My handle is Ibitata, YBYTATA, and there'll be a link to my webpage that has all my publications. It has maps, videos that I do on Latino and immigrant demographic transitions. But I also have a specific webpage on spatial demography that looks at the different demographic transitions that are happening within neighborhoods, specifically in St. Louis, but in other parts of the United States,
Of the
like
United
Chicago
States.
and New York.
So YBY
YBY
Tata.
Tata.
Uh-huh.
Ibitata.
YBY Tata is the Twitter handle.
Yes.
Don't forget about that, and we'll have it right here in the show. Thank you so much. Muchas gracias
De nada.
por estar con nosotros en Breve. And I'll see you next time with another fantastic and great episode of En Breve right here on STL TV.